The stone beneath my knees was not just cold, it was a living entity of frost, a glacier that had formed solely to seep through the thin, worn fabric of my trousers and leach the warmth from my very bones. I scrubbed. The rough bristles of the brush grated against the flagstones, a sound as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. Back and forth in a small, soapy circle of gray water. This was my world. This small, damp circle of labor was the only territory I could claim. Around me, the great hall of the Silver Peak Pack was a storm of color and noise, a frantic preparation for the winter solstice feast. Silks swished, platters clattered, and laughter, sharp and bright, cut through the air. No one looked down. To them, I was part of the floor, a stain to be worked around, and that was safety. To be seen was to be judged was to be found wanting. The scent hit me then, a cruel, beautiful torture. Roasted venison, honey-glazed roots, spiced wine simmering with oranges and cloves. It was the smell of warmth, of family, of a belonging so profound it made my throat ache. My stomach clenched, a tight, hollow fist of hunger, but I was used to that. The daughter of a disgraced man learns to live on scraps of food, of kindness, of hope. Honestly, it's a wonder she's allowed to breathe the same air. The voice, like chipped crystal, came from above. Lady Selene, her gown a waterfall of emerald silk, paused with her companion. Her eyes, the color of a frozen lake, skimmed over me as if I were a pile of forgotten rags. Some stains never wash out, no matter how hard you scrub. The traitor's blood must run so thick. Her friend, a beta named Iris, gave a tinkling, humorless laugh. The Alpha King should have purged the line when he had the chance. Now we must endure the ghost of her father's shame at every turn. My shoulders hunched of their own accord. My world shrank further, down to the suds on the stone, the raw redness of my knuckles. Don't look up, don't breathe, become the stone. I was a ghost, a whisper of a person. It was easier this way to accept the story they told. My father, Ronan, had been the king's own shield, his most trusted beta. Until the night the old king died, they said he turned his blade. They said ambition rotted his loyalty, but I remembered his laugh, a booming, joyful sound. I remembered the way he'd lift me onto his shoulders and promise me the stars were mine for the asking. The story never fit the man I knew. It was a garment woven from lies, but I'd been forced to wear it every day of my life. The head steward, Goran, a man built like a barrel with a permanent sneer, clapped his hands. The sound was a thunderclap in the vaulted space. The Alpha King arrives in 1 hour, perfection is demanded, nothing less. His gaze, sweeping the hall for imperfections, landed on me. It hardened. You, Elara. I froze, the dripping brush suspended above the bucket. This section is finished, you are done for the night. But Steward Goran, I whispered, my voice barely a thread of sound. The entryway is no longer your concern, he snapped, his voice cutting through the ambient noise. Several nearby servants stilled. No Omega of your lineage will be present during the king's feast. You are barred. Get to the kitchens. Better yet, he said, his lip curling, take yourself outside. I don't wish to see your face until the sun cracks the horizon. The humiliation was a brand, white-hot and searing. This wasn't just dismissal, it was a public flaying. I saw the quick glances, pity from a few, scorn from most, indifference from the rest. Being invisible was one thing, being made a spectacle of worthlessness was another. I scrambled up, my stiff limbs protesting. Keeping my gaze locked on the floor, I scurried from the hall, a mouse fleeing the light. I would not give them my tears, those were mine alone. The immense carved oak doors began to swing shut behind me, operated by 2 silent guards. Through the narrowing gap, I saw the first of the great iron chandeliers being lowered, its dozens of candles bursting into flame, casting a pool of molten gold across the feast-laden tables. A world of light and warmth, a world I could see, taste in the air, but never, ever touch. The thud of the locking bar falling into place was the final note of my sentence. The corridor was suddenly a tunnel of echoing cold. Goran's words echoed, go outside. A bitter laugh, silent and hollow, rose in my chest. Fine, if I was a shadow, I would join the night. I turned toward the servants' passage, my thin shawl pulled tight. The cold wasn't just a temperature now, it felt like a judgment. A confirmation that this emptiness, this biting solitude, was all the universe believed I deserved. The feast of my life would be a silent communion with the winter stars, a fitting banquet for the girl who was nobody at all. But as I pushed open the heavy iron door to the rear courtyard, a new, deeper chill settled into my bones. This was more than winter, this felt like an ending, heat. It was the first thing that assaulted him, a thick, woolen blanket of oppressive warmth. It came from the roaring hearths, from the press of 100 perfumed bodies, from the suffocating weight of the crown that was not just gold and silver, but expectation, duty, and a yawning, relentless solitude. Kaelen, Alpha King of the Silver Peak Pack, sat upon the obsidian throne and felt the walls of his own skin tighten. The throne was a masterpiece of intimidating craftsmanship, all jagged edges and cold, dark stone meant to inspire awe and fear. Tonight it felt like a cage. A drone of voices swirled around him, flattery as thin as parchment, political jockeying masked as conversation, the endless, hungry sound of a court that saw him only as a source of power or an obstacle to be managed. They toasted his strength, his prosperous reign, the might of his borders. They saw the crown, the broad shoulders, the unsmiling mouth. They did not see the fracture lines running through his spirit. His wolf, a presence usually coiled and powerful within him, was not just restless tonight, it was grieving. A low, constant keen of wrongness vibrated in his soul, a dissonance that had grown over months into a torment. It hated this, hated the starch of his formal jacket, the cloying sense, the way every smile was a calculation. The beast within yearned for the clean silence of the mountain peaks, the visceral truth of the hunt, the uncomplicated law of fang and forest. Not this gilded theater of lies, Your Majesty. The voice was like dry leaves scraping together. Lord Thuron, eldest of the council and keeper of tradition, leaned close. His breath smelled of mint and slow decay. The pack looks to you for stability. The rumors of your unrest grow. A formal bond, a Luna by your side, would silence them. Lady Lyra's bloodline is impeccable. An alliance with her house would secure the eastern passes for a generation. Kaelen's eyes drifted to the woman in question. Lady Lyra was carved from marble and ambition, beautiful in a way that was cold and precise. She met his gaze and offered a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Marrying her would be a political masterstroke and a life sentence to a frozen wasteland. His soul cried out for its fated mate, the one the moon goddess destined to soothe his beast and share his throne. But his wolf had remained silent and blind to every noble daughter presented. The council's patience for destiny had run out. The eastern passes are secure because my warriors hold them, Kaelen said, his voice a low rumble that silenced the immediate chatter. He hadn't meant to sound so harsh, but the rope of his control was fraying, strand by single strand. He felt their startled fear ripple outwards. Fear was a tool he used, but it was also a poison, ensuring no one ever drew close enough to see the man drowning beneath the king. He shoved back from the high table, the legs of his chair screeching in protest against the stone dais. A wave of silence followed his movement. I require air, he announced to the vaulted ceiling. He ignored Thuron's pinched frown, Lyra's sharp, assessing glance. He had to leave before the beast did it for him, before the snarl building in his chest broke free and confirmed every rumor of his instability. He strode from the hall, his personal guards falling into step behind him. Alone, he commanded, the word a crack of winter ice. They halted, bowing. The great doors opened, swallowed him, and closed, muting the cacophony into a dull roar. The corridor was a shock of cool, quiet darkness. He inhaled, but the clean cold did nothing to douse the inferno in his blood. He felt split, fractured. The man, the king, the wolf, three beings warring in one skin, tearing him apart from the inside. He walked without purpose, his feet carrying him down unused passageways, through archives of dust and memory, moving solely on a desperate instinct to outrun the turmoil within. He pushed through a half-rotted door that led to a small, walled courtyard. It was a forgotten place, a repository for broken casks and old gardening tools open to the sky. Snow drifted down in fat, silent flakes, dusting the cobblestones with a pure, untouchable white. And then he smelled it. It was not a scent, it was a revelation. It cut through the pinandozone storm of his own essence, through the lingering perfume of the hall, through the very cold itself. Lilac and snowmelt, frost on a moonlit petal. And beneath it, a sorrow so deep and old it resonated in the hollow of his own bones. His wolf, the grieving, furious monster that had been tearing at his sanity for months, suddenly went still. The endless keening stopped, the frantic pacing ceased. For the first time in years, the beast was not a thing of rage, it was a creature of awe. It lifted its great head and whined, a soft, yearning sound of homecoming. His human heart hammered against his ribs, his eyes, sharper than any human's, adjusted to the gloom. There, curled against the stone wall in a futile attempt to conserve warmth, was a small, shivering form. A girl. Her hair was a dark spill over her knees, her shoulders trembling violently with each breath. And in that instant, the world he ruled, the crown he bore, the lonely path he walked, all of it shattered, and from the ruins one undeniable, blazing truth emerged. Mate, the cold had begun to sing to me. A high, thin note in my ears, a crystalline hymn that promised a slow, numb surrender. I had stopped shivering. That was a bad sign, I dimly recalled. My thoughts were slow, syrupy things, drifting like the snowflakes that settled on my hair and lashes, just a little rest. Close your eyes, it doesn't hurt anymore. Then the world changed. It wasn't a sound, it was a pressure, a shift in the fabric of the night itself. The air grew heavy, charged, tasting of lightning and deep forest. A scent, overwhelming and utterly masculine, wrapped around me, pine needles crushed underfoot, the crisp edge of a winter storm, and something wild, untamed, and fiercely potent. My head, so heavy, lifted on its own. A figure filled the archway leading back to the castle, blotting out the distant torch glow. He was immense, a silhouette of pure power that seemed to make the courtyard walls shrink. Even shrouded in shadow, I knew, only one being carried such a terrifying, awe-inspiring presence. The Alpha King, terror, sharp and lucid, shot through the numbness. I was not to be here. I was not to be seen, especially not by him. I tried to scramble up, to flee into the deeper shadows, but my limbs were blocks of ice, unresponsive. He moved. Not with the stiff formality of the throne room, but with a predator's fluid grace, closing the distance between us in a few strides. And then his eyes found mine. They were silver, not gray, but molten, liquid silver, glowing with an inner light in the darkness. And they looked at me, not through me, not past me, with a shock so profound it mirrored my own. The strange energy in the air snapped tight. It pulled at the core of my being, at a place I never knew existed deep in my soul. Something sleeping there uncurled, stretched, and answered the call in his gaze with a silent, resonant chime. Mate, the word didn't come from him, it didn't come from me. It simply was an ancient law written into the universe, now revealed. The cold fled, incinerated by a sudden, dizzying heat that erupted in my chest and flooded my veins. My heart, sluggish a moment before, began to pound a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs. He was before me. He reached out, his hand impossibly large, and with a tenderness that shattered me, he brushed a melting snowflake from my cheek. His touch was a brand. A jolt of pure white energy arced through me, and a broken gasp escaped my lips. A sound answered me, a low, visceral growl that rumbled from his chest and vibrated in the stone beneath me. It wasn't anger, it was possession. It was a primal acknowledgement that shook the foundations of my world. You. His voice was rough, shattered glass and wonder. It was the first word he had ever spoken to me, and it felt like a vow. Before I could process anything, his hands were on me, one wrapped around my arm, his grip like forged steel, unbreakable but careful. The other swept the heavy, fur-lined cloak from his own shoulders. In one motion, he enveloped me in it. The weight was immense, the warmth unimaginable. It carried his scent, his storman pine essence, and it wrapped me in a haven of heat. He was pulling me up, pulling me forward. "No, please," I stammered, my voice a frozen rasp. "I can't, I'm forbidden." He didn't speak. He simply moved, an unstoppable force, hauling me gently but inexorably back toward the castle. He didn't take me to the servants' entrance. He marched directly toward the side entrance of the great hall itself, dread coiled like a serpent in my newly warmed stomach. "They locked me out," I pleaded, stumbling to keep pace with his long strides. "The steward, I'll be punished." He stopped just before the ornate doors. He turned, and in the dim light, his silver eyes blazed. The fury in them was not for me. It was a protective, terrifying rage that promised violence to anyone who had caused my distress. "Punished," he growled, the word a deadly promise. "Let them try." Then with a single powerful shove, he threw open the doors to the great hall. The wall of sound, scent, and light that had been sealed away from me moments before crashed over us. The music died mid-note, 100 conversations stuttered into silence, the clatter of cutlery ceased. Every head turned, every single eye in the vast, glittering room fixed on the scene at the door. On their mighty, fearsome Alpha King, his face a mask of grim determination. And on me, Elara, the traitor's Omega daughter, shrouded in the king's own royal cloak, being led into the heart of the light from which I had been banished. The silence was absolute, a living, stunned thing. He pulled me forward into the center of the room, onto the polished floor where I had scrubbed away my family's shame just hours before. He did not let go of my arm. He stood beside me, a bastion of unyielding will, and met the gaze of his shocked court. The scandal hadn't just begun. With that one act, he had declared war on their entire world. The silence was a physical weight pressing down on me until I felt I might be crushed into the polished stone beneath my feet. I stood in the center of the great hall, a displaced star in a foreign sky, anchored only by the heat of Kaelen's hand on my arm and the impossible weight of his cloak around my shoulders. The fur, so soft against my cheek, smelled overwhelmingly of him. It was a scent that now felt imprinted on my soul. I could feel the stares. They were not curious glances, they were arrows of judgment, of outrage, of icy calculation. I was a smudge on their perfect tapestry, a discordant note in their symphony of power. I wanted to shrink, to let the cloak swallow me whole, to become invisible again, but there was no hiding now. He had dragged me into the blinding light. Lord Thuron was the first to move. He detached himself from the crowd, his movements as smooth and silent as a serpent gliding over stone. His aged face was a careful mask, but his eyes, when they flicked to me, were chips of black ice. "My king," he said, his voice a low, respectful murmur that somehow carried to every corner of the hall. "Might I beg a private audience, a matter of delicate pack security?" Kaelen's grip on my arm tightened, not painfully but possessively, a silent declaration. "What you have to say to your king, Thuron, you may say before her." Thuron's mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing a flash of pure venom. "As you wish," he acquiesced, the words tight. "The council, and indeed many in this hall, find your intervention deeply concerning. This creature is the daughter of Ronan. Her very blood is a testament to betrayal. Her presence here, clad in the royal insignia no less, is an affront to your throne and an insult to the memory of your father." Each word was an expertly thrown dagger, aimed to wound and isolate. I flinched, the old shame rising like bile. This was the nightmare I'd foreseen. He had saved me from the cold only to throw me to the wolves, the political, two-legged kind whose teeth were far sharper. "Her name," Kaelen's voice cut through Thuron's rhetoric, a blade of cold fury, "is Elara. and she is under my protection. She will not be insulted, she will not be harmed. The finality in his tone brooked no argument. Protection? Thuron gave a dry, dismissive chuckle. Or an impulsive fixation. The pack needs a Luna, my king, not a rescued stray. Your judgment appears clouded. Kaelen moved. It was so fast I barely saw it. One moment he was beside me, the next he was a hair's breadth from Thuron, his immense presence towering over the older man. The air grew thick, charged with the power of his wolf. You forget yourself, Kaelen snarled, the sound low and vibrating with untamed authority. You forget who holds the crown, you forget who commands here. He turned his head, his silver gaze sweeping the paralyzed room. Guards, escort Elara to my chambers. She is to remain there under guard until I say otherwise. No one is to approach her, no one is to speak to her. His eyes locked with Thuron's. Is that understood? A ragged chorus of yes, Alpha King, rippled through the hall. Two stone-faced royal guards stepped forward. Gently but with firm pressure, they guided me away from Kaelen's side. The walk from the hall was a blur of stunned faces and whispering silk. We ascended grand staircases I had only ever cleaned, traversed corridors hung with tapestries depicting glorious pack history, a history that condemned my father. Finally, they stopped before a set of double doors carved from dark oak, inlaid with silver wolves running under a moon. One guard opened it and I was ushered inside. The door closed behind me with a soft, definitive click. I was alone, in the Alpha King's private chambers. The room was larger than the entire servants' dormitory. A fire roared in a cavernous hearth, painting dancing light over walls of stone and rich tapestries. Rugs, thick and soft, covered the floor. Books lined shelves. A huge, canopied bed dominated one side. It was opulent, powerful, masculine. It was also unmistakably a cage. A prison of velvet and gold. The scent of him was everywhere here, deeper and more complex than on the cloak. It was dizzying. I stood frozen just inside the door, afraid to move, afraid to touch anything, afraid to breathe too deeply. Minutes later, the door opened and closed. He stood there, having shed the immediate fury of the hall. Now he just looked weary and impossibly large in the confines of his own room. The argument began not with a shout, but with a shattered whisper from me. Why? The word trembled in the air between us. Why would you do that? You haven't protected me. You've painted the largest target in the kingdom on my back. You were freezing, he stated, as if it were the only fact that mattered in any universe. I would have survived. The protest burst from me, fueled by fear. It was better to be cold and ignored than to be this, your project, your controversy. You haven't saved me, you've sentenced me. A flicker of pain crossed his face, so raw and quick I almost doubted I saw it. I brought you in from the cold. You made me a weapon for your enemies to use against you. I cried, gesturing wildly at the luxurious prison. They will tear me apart just to get to you, don't you see that? He stalked closer, his shadow engulfing me. The raw, wild scent of him intensified. Let them try, he growled, and this time the vibration of it sank into my bones, a promise of shelter and of violence intertwined. His silver eyes held mine, and in that charged silence the anger between us shifted, transformed into something else entirely. A magnetic, terrifying pull, a silent question hanging in the warm air. He had caged me in gilded rooms, but as I looked into the torment in his eyes, I began to wonder who, in truth, was the real prisoner here. After he left, the silence in the chamber was a roaring thing in my ears. I paced, my bare feet sinking into the impossibly soft carpets. This was his den, his sanctuary, and I was an invasive species, a frightened bird trapped in a gilded aviary. His scent, pine, leather, storm, was a constant, confusing presence. It should have repelled me. Instead, it felt like a hook in my soul, pulling me deeper into a turmoil I didn't understand. My fear slowly gave way to a desperate, crawling curiosity. I trailed my fingers over the spine of a leather-bound book, over the cool surface of a polished obsidian paperweight. I was tracing the intricate carving on a heavy wooden chest when I noticed the first anomaly. The bedpost, the right-hand poster of the massive canopy bed, wasn't smooth. Near the base, the dark wood was splintered, deeply gouged, as if something with immense strength and terrible frustration had struck it again and again. A chill that had nothing to do with temperature traced my spine. I moved closer to the stone wall behind a tapestry depicting the first Silver Peak Alpha. I lifted the heavy fabric. Beneath it, the stone was scarred. 4 parallel gouges, deep and savage, were carved into the rock, spaced like the claws of a monstrous wolf. My breath caught. What kind of force could scar solid stone? My fingers hovered over the marks. They felt old, but the violence was still palpable. Turning, my eyes found the large, ornate wardrobe. It was a beautiful piece, but as I moved around it, I saw the back. My hand flew to my mouth. The wood was shredded, not worn, not aged, destroyed. Long, deep furrows raked across it, chunks missing entirely, as if a feral, enraged beast had been trapped against it, lashing out in a frenzy to escape. This was not the damage of battle. This was the evidence of a complete, utter loss of control. This was what his wolf did when it was caged, when the man could no longer hold it back. The cold dread solidified in my veins. The whispers about the Alpha King's temper, his legendary ferocity, took on a new, horrifying dimension. This was not the disciplined strike of a warrior. This was chaos. This was pain. The door opened silently. He stood there looking more exhausted than before, the fire in his eyes banked to embers. He saw me by the wardrobe, saw where my gaze was fixed. His expression closed off, becoming a wall of impassive stone. "What are you doing?" His voice was flat, dangerously quiet. "Nothing," I stammered, snatching my hand back. "I was just the room," he knew. He saw the understanding in my eyes. He walked stiffly to a side table and poured water into a crystal goblet, his movements tight with restraint. "You should not pry into things that do not concern you. They're hard to miss," I whispered, finding a sliver of courage. What happened here? It is none of your concern." The wall slammed down, final and impervious. But the strange, new connection between us, the bond that had sparked in the courtyard, thrummed with his suppressed agitation. I could feel it, a discordant energy buzzing beneath his skin, a silent scream. I took a hesitant step closer. Are you all right?" It was the wrong question. It was the key that unlocked the beast. "I'm fine," he roared, spinning around. The crystal goblet shattered in his hand, water and shards flying. His eyes were no longer silver. They were a blazing, predatory gold. A snarl ripped from his throat, not of possession, but of pure, unadulterated fury. He was suddenly not a king, but a primordial creature of tooth and claw, the human veneer stretched terrifyingly thin. I stumbled back, a scream lodging in my throat. For a heartbeat, I saw the monster from the wardrobe scars, alive and raging before me. He saw my terror. The golden fire in his eyes vanished, snuffed out by a wave of immediate, crushing horror. He looked at his own hand, cut and bleeding, at the ruined glass on the floor as if he didn't recognize them. The beast was gone, leaving only a man shattered by what lived inside him. "Elara," he began, his voice a ragged, broken thing. "Knock, knock, knock." The sound was sharp, official, an intrusion from the world of politics and pretense. He flinched, straightening his spine, the king's mask slamming back into place so fast it was audible. "What is it?" he barked, his voice strained. A guard's voice, formal and loud, came through the door. "My king, Lord Heroine and Lady Lyra, request an urgent audience. They state it is a matter of the pack's imminent future." The moment of raw vulnerability was over. The beast was caged again, and the king, with his courtiers and his political bride waiting, had to answer the call. He looked at me, a warning and a plea in his eyes, before turning to face the next battle, the one outside the door. He told the guards to make them wait. For a long moment he just looked at me, a tumult of regret and resolve in his silver eyes. He straightened his tunic, a simple gesture that seemed to rebuild the formidable Alpha King from the broken man of seconds before. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice low but absolute, "and do not make a sound." He opened the chamber door just wide enough to slip through into the antechamber, leaving it slightly ajar. I stood frozen in the center of the room, but the silence was an illusion. Through the crack, every word was as clear as if they stood beside me. "This is highly irregular, Thuron." Kaelen's voice was a study in controlled displeasure. "These are irregular times, my king." Thuron's smooth reply slithered through the gap, then another voice, crystalline and sharp as an icicle. "Lady Lyra, we are all concerned for you, Kaelen, for the stability of the pack." Her tone was dripping with faux sympathy. "This distraction, it is beneath your station. It makes you look weak." The word distraction was a needle to my heart. That's all I was to them, a problem to be solved. "Her name is Elara," Kaelen said, the words layered with frost, "and she is not a distraction. She is a traitor's whelp who should be serving in the scullery." Lyra snapped, her polite facade cracking. "The noble houses are whispering. They see your father's sentimentality in you. His soft heart led to chaos. Will you follow the same path?" A lethal silence followed. I held my breath, my fists clenched. I was the weapon they were using to bludgeon him. My existence was his weakness. The shame was a poison. I should run. I should vanish and free him from this millstone around his neck. But then Kaelen spoke, and it wasn't the roar of the beast or the command of a king. It was something quieter, colder, and far more deadly. "My father is dead, I am not him." Each word was precise, a shard of ice, "and you will not speak her name again with such disrespect." "Kaelen, be reasonable," Thuron interjected, a wheedling note in his voice. "No. You be reasonable, old man." Kaelen's voice dropped to a menacing whisper that carried perfectly. "Let me make this plain for you and for every whispering noble you represent. Elara stays, she is under my protection. Any insult to her is a challenge to me. Any threat against her is an act of treason against your king." He let the declaration hang, a line drawn in blood. "Now get out." I heard Lyra's sharp intake of breath, the rustle of expensive fabric as they retreated. The antechamber door clicked shut. He had defended me, not just defended me. He had declared war on my behalf. He had claimed me as his to shield, placing me squarely on his side against the most powerful figures in the kingdom. The shame I felt curdled, replaced by a dizzying, terrifying surge of something else, a fragile, desperate hope. For the first time in my life, someone had stood in front of me, someone had chosen me. The life of a ghost was over. There was no returning to the shadows. Kaelen had thrust me into the searing light, and now the entire pack was watching. I was no longer just Elara, the traitor's daughter. I was Elara, the Alpha King's crisis. And as that truth settled in my bones, a colder realization followed. I had just become the most dangerous person in the kingdom. The council would not let this stand. As their footsteps faded, I thought I heard Thuron's voice, a venomous thread on the air. "If he will not remove the problem, we will find someone who can." The days that followed were a strange, suspended dream. I wore clothes of softest wool, not scratchy linen. I ate spiced pears and warm bread from porcelain plates delivered by wide-eyed, silent servants. I slept in a bed that felt like a cloud, ensconced in sheets that smelled faintly of him. Every comfort was a jewel, and every jewel felt like it belonged to someone else. I was a stray wrapped in velvet, and I never forgot it. My gilded cage was comfortable, but the bars were still there. Kaelen was a constant, brooding presence. He spent hours at a massive desk by the fire, immersed in maps and documents, the weight of the kingdom on his shoulders. He rarely spoke to me, but I was hyper-aware of him. The air between us hummed with the unspoken, with the memory of his fury and his defense. I learned to read his subtle language. The tightening of his jaw meant the council was pressing. The restless tap of a finger meant his wolf was pacing. One evening he stood by the hearth, staring into the flames as if seeking answers in the coals. I was curled in a chair across the room, a book of poetry unopened in my lap. The silence was a taut wire. I needed water. The decanter was on a side table right next to him. I took a breath, steeling myself, and rose. I tried to make myself small, to slip through the space without touching the storm that was the Alpha King. But the room, for all its size, felt terribly small. As I passed, the loose sleeve of my gown whispered against the leather of his arm. The contact was fleeting, barely a brush, but it was a spark to tinder. A jolt of pure, shocking energy shot up my arm. I gasped, stumbling back. He turned, and his silver eyes in the firelight were molten, deep pools of some fierce, unnameable emotion. He was so close. I could see the pulse in his throat, feel the heat radiating from his body. Elara. My name on his lips was a prayer and a torment. He leaned in. The world contracted to the space between us. My mind emptied of everything but the scent of him, the sight of his lips, the impossible pull in my core. A desire, sharp and sweet and terrifying, bloomed within me. This was the precipice. This was where everything changed, but he froze. A war raged in his eyes, the man, the king, the beast, all at odds. With a harsh, frustrated sound that was almost a growl, he wrenched himself away, turning his back to me. "This is a mistake," he muttered, the words harsh and pained, spoken to the flames. The rejection was a physical blow, colder than any winter night. The warmth in my veins turned to ice. I fled back to my chair, my heart a bruised, aching thing. Before the hurt could fully settle, a soft knock came at the door. It was Anya, a young kitchen maid with kind eyes, the only one who ever dared to meet my gaze. She brought my evening meal. As she set the tray down, she leaned in, her voice a feather-light whisper meant only for me. "Be careful, miss," she murmured, her eyes on her hands. "The whispers in the lower halls, they've changed. It's not just about your father's betrayal anymore." She swallowed, her fear palpable. "They're saying he didn't just fail to protect the old king. They're saying Ronan was the one who plunged the knife in himself." The world dropped out from under me. The rejected mate, the political pawn, the traitor's daughter, all those labels were blown apart by this new, more vile poison. This wasn't just disgrace, this was monstrosity. And if they believed it of him, what did they believe of me? Kaelen was in a black mood the next day, a storm cloud contained in human skin. After hours of silent, tense pacing, he stopped before me. "You need air," he declared. It was not a suggestion. "We walk in the West Garden." Panic, sharp and immediate, lanced through me. "To be seen with you, after yesterday's whispers, it's not safe for you or for me." "I decide what is safe," he said, his tone leaving no room for debate. He held out a heavy, fur-lined cloak, a different one from the first, but just as imposing. Now, resignation was a bitter taste. I let him drape the cloak over my shoulders, its weight and his scent once again forming a barrier against the world. He led me out, not through secret passages, but through the main corridors, a king parading his most controversial subject. The West Garden was a geometric masterpiece of dormant rose bushes and snow-dusted hedges, enclosed by high stone walls. Its beauty was lost on me. I could feel the eyes from a dozen windows, sense the held breaths from behind frost-kissed glass. I walked beside him, a statue of dread, my head bowed. We were not alone for long. Lady Drusilla, a noble Omega known for her viper's tongue and her allegiance to Lyra, appeared on the gravel path ahead, two simpering companions in her wake. They offered deep, flawless curtsies to Kaelen. "My king," Drusilla purred, her voice like honey over poison. "How gracious you are. To show such charity to the unfortunate, it speaks to a magnanimous heart." Her eyes, like chips of flint, slid to me, though one wonders if such a heart is a strength or a vulnerability in a ruler. Her friends tittered. The old Elara would have dissolved into the ground, but something had hardened in me since the antechamber, since Anya's whisper. A spark of defiance fed by pain. Charity, I said, my voice quiet but clear on the cold air, is not required where none is owed. Drusilla's face stiffened with surprise, then contorted with rage. You dare to speak, you whose bloodline is a river of treachery. They say the sin of the father stains the child's soul. Yours must be black indeed. The insult to my father, to the new, horrific rumor, was the final strike. I felt a strange heat in my chest, not embarrassment, but a righteous fire. I lifted my chin and met her gaze. You speak of things you do not understand, my lady. You trade in echoes. You have never known truth. The insult, the sheer audacity from a supposed nobody, struck her speechless. Then her rage broke. You insolent, filthy little. The sound that tore through the garden then was not human. It was the voice of the primal abyss, a roar of fury so pure and violent it silenced the world. Kaelen was no longer beside me. He was between us, his body transformed. He seemed larger, his posture crouched, predatory. His canines were elongated, sharp points against his lip. And his eyes, they were the solid, burning gold of a wolf pushed past all reason. He moved in a blur of lethal intent. He didn't touch her. He stopped a breath from her throat, his snarl vibrating the very air, a promise of evisceration. Drusilla screamed, a raw sound of terror, and fell backward into a snow-dusted hedge, her companions scattering like leaves in a gale. Guards came running, their faces pale with fear, not of a threat, but of their own alpha in this state. Kaelen. My cry was instinctive, laced with fear for him. He froze, the gold in his eyes flickered. He looked at me, and in that fractured second I didn't see a king or a beast. I saw a tormented soul, horrified by what lived inside him. He took a shuddering breath, the beast receding. Without a word, without looking at the weeping noblewoman, he turned and stalked away, leaving me alone in the center of the scandal. As I stood trembling, another figure emerged from the shadow of a yew tree, Lady Lyra. She looked at the sobbing Drusilla, then her cold, calculating gaze settled on me. "See what you provoke," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "You are not his balm, you are his trigger. A true mate bond is meant to calm the beast, not unleash it." A smile, thin and cruel, touched her lips. "That bond is mine by right and by arrangement, and when I claim it, I will be the one to soothe his savagery. You are just the sickness I will cure him of." Lyra's words became a worm in my mind, burrowing deep. "You are his sickness." They echoed alongside the memory of the golden-eyed beast in the garden, the violence Kaelen fought to chain every moment. Was she right? Was this strange, chaotic connection between us not a blessing, but a curse? Was my presence corroding the last of his control? The thought was an acid, eating away at the fragile hope that had begun to grow. I felt like a ghost again, haunting the edges of his life, poisoning the very air he breathed. When Kaelen returned to his chambers hours later, the silence between us was a frozen lake, thick and impenetrable. He couldn't look at me. The shame of what he'd nearly done was a wall between us. That night, sleep was impossible. I huddled in the chair by the dying fire, a blanket around my shoulders. Then voices seeped through the door from the antechamber. His and Thuron's. I knew I shouldn't listen, but I was rooted to the spot, a prisoner of my own dread. An unmitigated catastrophe. Thuron's voice was a low, furious hiss. "You nearly ripped out a noblewoman's throat in your own garden. The court is in an uproar. They see a king who cannot rule his own wolf, who is led by his nose by a problematic omega." "It was under control," Kaelen bit out, but his voice was hollow, exhausted. "Was it?" Thuron challenged, the sound of a smile in his voice. "Look at the evidence, my boy. This pull you feel for her, it makes you reckless. It uncages the monster you fought for years. The pack needs stability. A king must be master of himself. Is this girl worth your crown? Is this chaotic, destructive pull truly the moon goddess's design for a king?" My heart clenched. I pressed a hand to my mouth, praying silently for him to defend us, to roar his denial. There was a long, heavy pause. When Kaelen finally spoke, his voice was a broken thing, filled with a despair that shattered my world. "I don't know." The confession was a whisper of utter defeat. My wolf, it recognizes her. The pull is unlike anything I've ever known, but this rage, it's consuming me. Maybe you are right, Thuron. Maybe this is all a colossal mistake. He took a ragged breath. Maybe the goddess got it wrong. The universe stopped. The fire, the room, the very castle dissolved into a void of white noise. There was only his doubt, his agreement with my deepest fear. I was a mistake, unworthy, a sickness. The man who had wrapped me in his cloak now believed I belonged in the cold. The fragile, glowing thread I'd felt between us didn't just fray, it snapped. A silent, internal severance that left a howling emptiness in my soul. The conversation droned on, but I was drowning. Then Thuron's voice cut through the fog, sharp and final. The border lords will not wait. They demand a formal betrothal to secure their loyalty. You have until the night of the blood moon to announce your engagement to Lady Lyra. Fail and they will see it as weakness and challenge your right to the throne. He paused. The choice is simple, my king, your kingdom or the girl. The morning light was a lie. It streamed through the tall windows, bright and cheerful, but it felt like an interrogation lamp, exposing every crack in my spirit. I sat on the edge of the colossal bed, the luxurious fur throw around me feeling like a shroud. His words were a poison in my blood. A mistake, fate got it wrong. When the door opened and he entered, he looked like a man who had fought a war and lost. Shadows pooled under his eyes, and guilt was etched into every line of his face. He stopped, seeing me dressed not in the fine clothes he'd provided, but in my own worn, simple servant's dress. I had shed the costume of his error. "Elara," he began, his voice gravel, "about what you may have overheard, was it the truth?" My voice surprised me, clear, steady, cold as the mountain peaks. The pain had burned away everything but a brittle, defiant core. I stood and faced him. "Am I your mistake, Alpha King?" He flinched as if struck. "It is not that simple." "It feels profoundly simple to me," I said, taking a step forward. The cowering Omega was gone. In her place stood a woman with nothing left to lose. "I have lived my life as a ghost because of my father's crime. I have fed on scraps and silence, and I accepted it because I believed that was my lot. But I will not be your secret shame. I will not be a political dilemma you debate in chambers and discard when I become inconvenient." My voice trembled now, but with a raw, furious power. "If I am a mistake, then have the courage to say it to my face and cast me out. Do not let me linger in the corners of your life while you weigh your crown against your conscience." The challenge hung between us, sharp and glittering. He stared, stunned. He had expected tears, not a sword forged from his own doubt. At that moment a firm knock echoed. "My king," a guard called. "The court is assembled in the Hall of Accord. It is time." The blood moon ultimatum, the choice, it was here. Kaelen's eyes, desperate and torn, locked with mine. A silent, agonized battle raged within them, duty versus soul. He looked away first, his face hardening into the impassive mask of the ruler. He walked past me, his shoulder brushing mine, a fleeting, painful contact. I followed him, I don't know why, perhaps to witness my own execution, perhaps to finally see the end of the hope that had tormented me. The Hall of Accord was packed, buzzing with a tense anticipation. Thuron stood near the dais, a faint, satisfied smile on his lips. Lyra was beside him, radiant in silver, the picture of a queen in waiting. Every head turned as we entered. The whispers died. Kaelen ascended the steps to his high seat and turned. His gaze swept the room, over the schemers and the loyal, but it did not find me. "There has been much speculation," he began, his voice echoing with regal authority, "concerning the Omega, Elara." He said my name like a stranger's. "She was granted temporary shelter within these walls due to a moment of misguided charity. That shelter is now revoked." The words were a physical impact, driving the air from my lungs. "Her presence has become a disruption to the harmony of the pack and the focus of the crown," he continued, his tone devoid of all emotion. "Her stay is concluded. She will be escorted from the castle grounds immediately. She holds no status here. He finally looked at me, and in his silver eyes I saw not coldness but an abyss of agony. He was trying to save my life by destroying my heart. She is nothing to me, nothing. The word was a guillotine blade severing me from the world. It echoed in the cavernous silence of the hall, a final, absolute decree. The faces around me swam, smirking, triumphant, pitying. Lyra's smile was a slash of victory. Thuron gave a slow, approving nod. The king had chosen his kingdom. He had chosen to send me back to the cold. The bond, that invisible, elemental tether that had hummed between us since the courtyard, had been strained, cracked by his doubt. Now, with his public renunciation, it shattered completely. The pain was not emotional. It was a cataclysm. A spear of absolute zero lanced through my heart. Every nerve in my body shrieked in silent agony. My vision whited out. The world dissolved into a roar of static. My knees buckled and I fell toward the cold marble floor, but something happened in the space between standing and falling. As the connection to him was severed, another connection, deeper and older, was violently awakened. It was as if a dam, built over a lifetime of suppression and shame, burst inside my soul. A wave of power, cold and clean and vast, erupted from my core. I did not hit the floor. I hovered, suspended an inch above the stone, held aloft by a force that was not my own. The torches lining the hall didn't flicker, they erupted. Columns of pure, silver-white flame shot toward the ceiling, burning with a cold, silent light. The temperature in the hall plummeted. Frost, in beautiful, intricate, fractal patterns, exploded from my body, racing across the marble in a crystalline wave, crawling up the legs of tables and thrones. Nobles cried out, stumbling back from the sudden, unnatural cold. Gasps of shock turned to shouts of fear. My feet touched the ground. I rose. I was no longer the hunched Omega. I stood tall, my head lifting of its own accord. When I opened my eyes, I knew they were no longer simple brown. They glowed with a soft, internal moonlight, casting a silver sheen on the terrified faces before me. I was shattered, I was heartbroken, but I was also undeniably powerful. I looked at the court, at their fear, and felt a terrifying calm. I was not their pawn. I was not his mistake. I was something else, something they had forgotten how to fear. My gaze found Kaelen. He was staring, his regal composure shattered, his face a mask of utter shock, horror, and a dawning, awestruck realization. He had discarded a stone and uncovered a dormant star. Amid the chaos, one man did not cower. An older lord, grizzled and clad in the leathers of a border warden, Lord Cillian, who had served with my father, stared at me. His face held not fear, but a profound, trembling recognition. He breathed a single word, a name from ancient ballads and half-remembered lore, a word that sliced through the panic. Luminara. Kaelen felt the world tilt on its axis. He had just sacrificed his soul on the altar of duty, condemning his mate to save her from the vipers in his court. He had chosen the crown, chosen a future of desolate emptiness, believing it was the only way to keep her alive. And the universe had laughed in his face. Elara was not a helpless Omega to be protected. She was a force of nature, a Luminara, a myth given flesh. The legend whispered in the oldest tales, a line of rare she-wolves blessed not with submissive Omega traits, but with the pure defensive power of the moon itself. Protectors, not pawns. He had shattered them both for a lie. He dismissed the hysterical court, ignoring Thuron's sputtered demands to contain the witchcraft. He retreated to his war room, the image of Elara glowing with lunar fire seared into his mind. Luminara, the key turned in a lock he never knew existed. An hour later, a quiet, firm knock. It was Lord Cillian. The old warden's eyes were still wide with the shock of revelation. "My king, I must speak. What I know, it changes everything." Desperate, Kaelen let him in. "Luminara," he said, the word foreign on his tongue. "It is a bloodline, sire," Cillian said, his voice thick with emotion. a lineage of guardians. Their power awakens only under extreme duress, often at the breaking of a false bond or a profound betrayal. Elara's mother was one, and her father, Ronan, he was not her mate. He was her shield, sworn to protect the Luminara line with his life. Kaelen sank into a chair, the truth a physical blow. Her father was a traitor, he killed my father. No, Cillian's denial was fierce. That is the lie Thuron's predecessor spun to cover the old king's shame. Your father, rest his soul, had grown obsessed with old, dark magics. He sought to amplify his own power to create an unbreakable bloodline. Ronan discovered it. He pleaded with him to stop. The night the old king died, he was attempting a forbidden ritual. It went wrong. A shadow beast, a thing of pure malice, was summoned. Cillian leaned forward, his old eyes blazing. Ronan died fighting it, giving his life to save your father. The beast slew the king before it was banished. The old council lord, to hide the king's folly and secure his own power, declared Ronan the assassin. He orphaned a Luminara child, hoping her power would sleep forever. The guilt was a black tide, drowning him. He had built his reign on this lie. He had vilified a hero. He had tortured the man's daughter with the shame of a crime he didn't commit. The rage that had plagued him for months found its true target, not his own beast, but the corruption festering in his court. His path was suddenly, brilliantly clear. The crown meant nothing. He had to find her. He had to beg forgiveness on his knees. He had to burn the lies from his kingdom, starting with Thuron. As this new, clean fury solidified in his soul, the door burst open. A scout, mud-spattered and panting, fell to one knee. Alpha King, forgive the intrusion. Alpha Gorath of the Stone Maw Pack has crossed the northern border with his full war host. Kaelen was on his feet. Gorath, on what pretext? The scout's face was grim. He sends a declaration, sire. He cites your instability. He says your public rejection of a fated Luminara is an affront to the moon goddess and proof you are unfit to rule. The man hesitated. He issues a formal challenge for the throne. And he claims the Luminara as his rightful prize of war. The throne room, the castle, the entire gilded nightmare, I left it all behind. I ran not like a scared rabbit, but like a wildfire, fueled by a cold, clear fury. Lord Cillian had found me in the chaotic aftermath, his eyes holding not pity but a fierce respect. He guided me out through forgotten hunters' tunnels, leading me to a small, abandoned forester's lodge deep within the royal woods. Here, surrounded by the silent, snow-clad pines, I could finally breathe. The power that had erupted from me now simmered beneath my skin, a constant, humming presence like a second heartbeat made of moonlight. I didn't understand it, I couldn't control it, but it was mine. I sat on the porch watching the moon rise. I would not be a prize. I would not be a weapon. I would disappear. I would find a place where I could be just Elara. A branch snapped. I was on my feet, the cold energy flaring to life around my hands in a nimbus of silver light. A figure stepped from the tree line. Kaelen. He looked haggard, his royal clothes torn from a frantic journey through the forest. He stopped 20 feet away, holding his hands up, palms open. He looked utterly broken. Elara. My name was a raw wound on his lips. You are not welcome here, I said, my voice as cold as the power in my veins. You made your choice, you chose your crown. I chose wrong. He took a slow, careful step forward. I chose to protect you by destroying you, and it was the act of a coward. I came to tell you the truth, to beg if such a thing is even possible anymore. And he told me. He told me of my father, Ronan, the shield, the hero. He laid bare the council's decades-long lie, his own father's dark folly, the sacrifice that had been twisted into treason. He confessed to ruling a kingdom built on rotten foundations. Each word was a chisel, cracking the ice around my heart. I wanted to hate him. I needed to. But the shattered place inside me where our bond had been ached at the raw sincerity of his pain. He wasn't speaking as a king. He was a man who had lost his way and was groping blindly for a path back. Even if it's all true, I whispered, the anger and a treacherous, aching hope warring within me. What does it change? You still cast me out. I will not be caged again, Kaelen, not by your enemies and not by your guilt. I would never cage you, he pleaded, another step. I would lay the world at your feet. I would spend my every breath earning a fraction of your forgiveness. Suddenly, the woods erupted. Figures dropped from the trees, surrounded us, royal guards, their swords drawn. And stepping from behind a giant oak, his face a mask of cold disappointment, was Lord Thuron. Such a tragic spectacle, Thuron sighed. The king, clearly unhinged by this creature's magic, fleeing to her side. He is no longer fit for duty. He smiled. For the good of the pack, he must be relieved of his command, permanently. The betrayal was so complete it was almost elegant. Thuron, the mentor, the guide, the voice of tradition. The serpent had been coiled at the heart of the kingdom since before Kaelen was born. You, Kaelen snarled, the sound thick with disbelief and a rising, righteous fury. He moved instantly, placing his body between me and the guards. The border lords, the pressure, this was you. Politics is the art of pressure, my boy, Thuron said with a condescending sigh. You, like your father, became sentimental, unpredictable. It was I who sent word to Gorath. A rival with a legitimate claim is so much tidier than a messy coup. He will take the throne and I will guide him. The pack needs a firm, traditional hand. Not one softened by distractions. A wave of cold understanding washed over me. I remembered Thuron's occasional, seemingly kind words to me in the halls, assessments, not kindness. He had been studying the king's weakness, and I had been the focal point. I had feared the tormented lion while trusting the gentle voice of the snake. You are the traitor, I breathed, the truth settling like a stone. Thuron's eyes flicked to me, pure malice now unconcealed. The lie held this kingdom together. I will not let a resurrected ghost and a lovesick king destroy that. He nodded, take them. The guards advanced, but Kaelen was no longer the conflicted ruler. This was an alpha whose mate was threatened, whose family's honor had been desecrated. He roared a sound of pure, unfiltered wrath and met their charge. I didn't think, I reacted. As a guard lunged at Kaelen's flank, I threw out my hand. A whip crack of shimmering, cold air lashed out. The guard cried out as he was flung back, a sheet of rime coating his armor. The power was wild, instinctive, but it was mine. We fought back to back, a king and a queen of myth, a storm of steel and a dance of frost. Kaelen was a whirlwind of precise, controlled violence, his rage finally given a worthy outlet. Together, we were a devastating force. The traitorous guards fell back, overwhelmed. Kaelen disarmed the last man and turned on Thuron, his eyes blazing with lethal gold light. The old wolf didn't flinch. He simply drew a curved, ancient horn from his cloak. You may have the strength of a beast, boy, he said, smirking, but I have the law. He lifted the horn and blew a single, piercing note that echoed through the frozen woods. From the trees, a new force emerged, larger, wilder wolves, their eyes glowing with predatory hunger. At their head was a massive alpha with a face like weathered granite and eyes like chips of flint. Alpha Gorath. Thuron lowered the horn. The formal challenge for the throne has been witnessed. It will be settled at dawn under the blood moon, he announced triumphantly, as is ancient law. Alpha Gorath stepped forward, his presence a vacuum that sucked the warmth from the clearing. His eyes, small and dark, swept over us before settling on me with a greedy, possessive hunger. So the Luminara prize, he grunted, his voice like grinding stones. Thuron did not exaggerate, she smells of captured starlight. He looked at Kaelen with open contempt. And you are the fool who threw her away, you are not fit to be a king. Kaelen stood as an unbreakable wall between Gorath and me. His fury was a palpable force. She is not a prize, and you will not touch her. He gave a sharp, accepting nod. I will meet you on the challenge grounds, but know this, Gorath. I do not fight for a crown, I fight for her. He risked a glance back at me, and in that fleeting moment the king vanished, leaving only the man, the mate. I was wrong, I was a fool, I will not lose you again. His eyes burned with a vow more sacred than any coronation oath. I will die before I let him take you. His words struck my soul. All the pain, the betrayal, melted away in a surge of pure, terrifying fear, not for myself, but for him. To lose him now was unthinkable. The bond between us, though changed, flared with a desperate protective fire. I loved him. In the face of death, it was my only truth. Gorath let out a short, brutal laugh, touching, but I do not fight with sentiment. He gave an almost imperceptible signal. One of his warriors threw a small pouch into the air. It burst, raining a fine, silvery dust over us. Wolf's bane and silver mix, a paralytic. Kaelen roared as he inhaled, his immense strength draining instantly, his muscles locked. He staggered, fighting to stay upright, his eyes wide with furious betrayal. Kaelen, I screamed, reaching for my power, but I was too slow, too untrained. Gorath's warriors surged. They overwhelmed the paralyzed king, forcing him to his knees, and before I could move, Gorath was on me. His hand, massive and crushing, clamped around my arm. His scent was of blood and stale earth. "The prize comes with me," he snarled and began to drag me away toward his war party. I fought, I kicked, but he was immovable. I looked back and saw Kaelen on his knees, utterly helpless, forced to watch as his rival stole his mate. The agony in his eyes was the last thing I saw before the forest swallowed me. The world became a jarring, painful blur of motion. Gorath's grip was a manacle of iron, his pace relentless as he hauled me through the dark, frozen forest. I could hear the shouts and snarls of the conflict fading behind us, swallowed by the greedy silence of the pines. Despair, colder than my own burgeoning power, threatened to drown me. I could still see Kaelin's eyes, the agony of helplessness as he watched me taken. We reached a sprawling, chaotic camp nestled in a rocky hollow, the Stone Maw War host. It was a place of crude hides, smoking fires, and the hard, ruthless energy of wolves on the march. I was thrust into Gorath's personal tent, a large space stinking of cured leather, blood, and dominance. Silver-laced manacles were clamped around my wrists. The metal was a vile, draining presence, a cold that leached not just warmth but the shimmering lunar energy I'd only just discovered. It muted the power to a faint, frustrated hum beneath my skin. I was a trophy on display. Gorath would sit across from me, tearing into haunches of meat with his teeth, his dark eyes fixed on me with a calculating hunger that had nothing to do with desire. "Your king is soft," he'd grunt, tossing a bone to the dirt floor. "He rules with his heart." A true alpha rules with his fangs. He lets old men like Thuron whisper in his ear, "I will grind Silverpeak to dust and build something stronger from its bones. And you," he'd gesture with a greasy hand, "you will be the jewel in that new crown." A Luminara's power bound to mine. One evening he crouched before me, his scent overwhelming. You feel the pull to him, yes, the fated mate bond, a sweet, fragile thing. His lips peeled back in a smile. "But you're kind, Luminara, you are not limited to one connection. Your magic can form another bond, a bond of pure power. It can be forged with any dominant alpha strong enough to take it." He reached out, his calloused fingers gripping my chin, forcing me to look at him. "It will not feel like love. It will feel like a chain of lightning, like a crown of ice, and it will make me unstoppable." As his skin touched mine, I felt it, a sickening, invasive jolt, a grotesque parody of the soul-deep resonance I'd felt with Kaelen. It was a phantom bond, a clawing, empty thing that sought to overwrite the sacred. The horror of it, the violation, was worse than any physical threat. Doubt, his most potent weapon, slithered into my heart. What if he was right? What if the one pure, magical truth of my life was not unique? What if my destiny was just to be a battery of power for the strongest tyrant? The thought unmoored me. If fate was so malleable, so cruel, then what was the point of any of it? My silent turmoil was shattered by a warrior bursting into the tent. "Alpha, the Silverpeak forces, they attacked our eastern flank." Gorath listened, and a slow, brutal smile spread across his face. He stood, looking down at me with triumph. It seems your fallen king has a little fight left in him, a futile final gesture. He delivered the next words like a killing blow. His assault was crushed, his loyalists are scattered, and he, Gorath paused, savoring it, is wounded, alone and bleeding out in the snow. The forest floor was a frozen pallet of pain. Kaelen lay against the gnarled root of an ancient oak, his hand pressed to his side. A gash, courtesy of a silver-tipped spear, burned with a venomous fire. The wolfsbane dust still fogged his muscles, making every movement a labor. The attack had been a desperate, reckless gamble to divert Gorath to get to me. It had failed, he had failed. Lord Cillian and a handful of bloodied survivors found him. The old warden's face was grim. "The wound is deep, my king. The silver, where is she?" Kaelin's voice was a ragged scrape. "Gorath has her, sire. We could not break through." The failure was a stone in his throat, but the true wound was the howling void where Elara's presence should be. The bond was silent, shattered by his own words and the distance. He had failed to protect her. He was everything his enemies claimed, a weak, sentimental fool. Before Cillian could tend to him, another group emerged from the shadows, not stone maw warriors. Lord Thuron, flanked by several high-ranking nobles who had sided with his coup. They looked at the wounded king, at his pitiful remnant of a force, with cold, clinical satisfaction. "Look at him," Thuron announced, his voice carrying in the hushed woods. "This is your Alpha King. Beaten in his first skirmish, bleeding in the dirt, his fated mate stolen by a rival. He cannot lead, he cannot protect what is his, he is unfit. The challenge under the blood moon is a mercy. Gorath will simply formalize what is already obvious." The words struck with the force of truth because a part of Kaelen believed them. His rage, his instability, his catastrophic rejection of Elara, it had all led here. He had brought ruin to his pack and doom to the only soul that mattered. The guilt was a devouring beast. He was broken, hopeless. He stared at his bloodied hands. In that moment of absolute despair, as his body failed and his spirit fractured, he felt it, the final, delicate thread. The last remnant of his connection to Elara, stretched across the miles by desperation and love, the last ember in his darkness, it snapped. It was not pain. It was cessation, a profound spiritual silence. The part of his soul intrinsically woven with hers simply vanished. Kaelen threw his head back and howled. It was not the sound of a king or even a wolf. It was the sound of a soul being ripped in two. An agony so complete, so final, it silenced the forest and made Thuron's men step back in primal fear. He had lost her, not to Gorath, to death. The broken bond could mean nothing else. In the reeking darkness of Gorath's tent, I was staring at the silver threads in my manacles when it happened. One moment there was a faint, distant pulse, a fragile, grieving heartbeat that was Kaelen's presence in my soul, a single star in my personal night. The next the star winked out, not faded, not dimmed, extinguished. The silence it left behind was absolute, a void more profound than any sound. My breath hitched, my heart stopped. In the lore of our people, a fated bond was eternal. It could only be broken by one thing. Death, Gorath's warrior, hadn't lied. Kaelen was wounded, alone, and now he was gone. The finality was a wave of ice washing over me, extinguishing the last flicker of warmth of fight. The world turned gray. The cold of the manacles seeped into my soul. What was the point? My protector was gone, my love was gone. The hope that had tormented and sustained me was a ghost. The old Elara, the worthless Omega, rose up to claim me. To surrender, to accept the dark, to let Gorath's false bond overwrite the silence, it seemed like a mercy. Gorath entered, sensing the change. "It is done," he said without a shred of sympathy. "Your weakling king is gone, the path is clear. Submit, forge the power bond with me. You will stand as queen beside the strongest alpha in the land. Refuse and you will fade into the nothing you feel now." And I nearly did. The despair was a suffocating weight, but as I focused on that absolute silence, that gaping wound in my soul, I felt something else. Deep within the void, beneath the grief, a tiny, stubborn spark. It was not Kaelen, it was not the bond, it was a cool, quiet light, the Luminara power, my power. It hadn't come from him, he hadn't given it to me. His love had only been the key that unlocked the door to a room that had always belonged to me. The bond had not been my strength, it had shown me where my true strength was hidden. My despair did not vanish, it crystallized. It sharpened into a diamond-hard point of resolve. I was not defined by the man I had lost. I would be defined by the legacy he died trying to protect. By my father's true legacy as a shield, by my own birthright. I slowly lifted my head. When my eyes met Gorath's, they were no longer clouded with grief. They glowed with a calm, cold, silver fire. He took an involuntary step back. The broken prize was gone. A queen was rising from the ashes. Gorath saw the change and his confidence faltered. The cowed Omega was gone. In her place stood something ancient and terrible. I focused on the spark within me, the cool light I had mistaken for a reflection of Kaelin's strength. I understood now, it was the source. My grief for Kaelen, a cold, black stone, became my anchor. My rage at my captors, a simmering heat, became my forge. My love, my loyalty to his memory, a fierce, unwavering light, became my guide. The silver glow intensified, brightening from a soft moonlight to a brilliant, searing incandescence, lunar fire. It pulsed with an absolute, purifying cold that made the very air crackle. I looked at my chained hands. My worth had never been a question for others to answer. I was Elara, I was Luminara. Focusing my will, I poured the cold fire into the manacles. They didn't melt. The silver screeched, instantly flash-freezing, becoming impossibly brittle. With a sharp cry, I slammed my wrists together. The chains shattered like glass, falling away in a cascade of glittering dust. Guards, Gorath bellowed, shock turning to fury. They surged in, but they were too late. I rose to my feet and unleashed my power. A wave of shimmering, white-cold fire erupted from me in a controlled ring. It was not to kill, but to command. The ground froze into a slick black mirror. The tent poles groaned and cracked with frost. The warriors cried out as the unnatural cold seized their limbs, slowing them to a sluggish crawl. In the chaos, I ran. I burst from the tent into the heart of the camp. Wolves turned, snarling, but hesitated, stunned by the glowing woman who moved like a winter storm. I was a vision of myth, and their fear gave me the seconds I needed. I didn't look back. I fled into the woods not as a victim, but as a force. I was no longer running from my past. I was running toward my future. If Kaelen was alive, I would find him. I would save him. If he was dead, I would avenge him. I would burn his enemies from the world with my silent, cold fire. I was the storm. An instinct deeper than the lost bond guided me, a primal pull of my Luminara blood toward the royal line I was born to protect. It led me to a hidden, narrow ravine, a place of last resort. The scent of blood and despair was thick, and there he was. Kaelen lay on a bed of cloaks, Lord Cillian kneeling beside him, his face etched with hopelessness. Kaelen was pale as death, his breathing shallow. The wound on his side was a festering, blackened horror, veins of silver poison visibly crawling beneath his skin. He was dying. The breaking of the bond hadn't been a trick of distance. It was his life force fading away. Tears streamed down my face, freezing on my cheeks. This was not the time for grief, it was the time for creation. I pushed through the stunned, wounded warriors and fell to my knees at his side. "My queen," Cillian breathed, his eyes wide with a desperate hope. I placed my hands over the poisoned wound. I closed my eyes and called to the power within me. I had used it for defense, for escape. Now I would use it to heal, to rebuild. The lunar fire flowed from my palms, but this time it was not a raging torrent. It was a gentle, steady stream of pure silver light. It sank into his skin, not with cold, but with a soft, cleansing warmth. I could feel the vile silver poison, a living corruption, recoil from my light. I pulled at it, drawing it out of his flesh and into my fire where it was consumed, purified into nothing. But the wound was not just physical. His spirit, his wolf, was shattered. The void where our bond had been was a black hole in his soul. I pushed my power deeper, past flesh and bone, into the essence of him. I found the emptiness. And into that void, I did not try to rebuild the old bond. I offered something new. I poured my own essence, my own strength, my love, and my forgiveness into it. A connection forged not by fate alone, but by choice, by sacrifice, a bond between two sovereigns. Two equals. His eyes snapped open. They were silver again, clear, and they were filled with me. He saw me not as the Omega he'd rejected, but as the magnificent, powerful queen who had pulled him back from the abyss. The guilt and shame that had crippled him were incinerated in the light of my grace. "Elara," he rasped, his hand lifting weakly to cup my cheek. "I'm here," I whispered, my tears falling freely now. "I thought I'd lost you." "Never," he vowed, his voice gaining strength with every beat of his heart, now sinking with mine. "Not from you, never again." We had been torn apart by doubt and duty. We were reforged in sacrifice and power. We were no longer just fated mates. We were a king redeemed by his queen, and a queen who had claimed her crown. Lord Cillian approached, his face grim but his eyes shining. "My king, my queen," the titles, spoken together, felt earned. "Gorath's scouts have found the ravine, the blood moon reaches its apex." The challenge begins. The sky was a wound, bleeding crimson light over the snow. The blood moon hung, swollen and ominous, casting the world in shades of rust and shadow. In the narrow mouth of the ravine, Kaelen's small, battered force stood ready for a final stand. Their hope was not in numbers, but in the king and queen who stood before them. Kaelen donned a simple breastplate, the armor of a warrior, not a distant monarch. As he fastened the last strap, I came to him. I wore no armor. My power was my shield, my resolve my sword. He looked at me, his heart in his eyes, a love so fierce it was a tangible force. "For everything I put you through, there are not enough words for my regret," he said, his voice thick. "There is nothing to forgive," I answered, taking his hand. "We were both prisoners, now we are free." Our new bond hummed between us, a tangible, silvery thread of shared strength, thought, and purpose. He was the earth, the fury, the unyielding mountain. I was the sky, the magic, the untouchable moon. Before the battle, we stepped aside. In the eerie red light, away from all eyes, he took both my hands. "Before we face them, I would have you as my queen, not by decree, but by my choice, by my soul." "And I would have you as my king," I answered, my glowing eyes meeting his. "By my heart, by my magic." It was our own ceremony. No priests, no crowns, only a vow. He leaned in, and in the oldest tradition of our kind, he gently pressed his lips to the mark his teeth had once made on my neck in the garden, a silent reaffirmation. A promise. Then I rose on my toes and did the same, my touch leaving a faint, cool shimmer on his skin. It was not a claim of ownership, but a seal of unity. Where one went, the other would follow, even unto death. We walked out hand in hand, a king of shadows and a queen of light. On the plain before the ravine, Gorath's army was a dark sea. The blood moon reached its zenith. The final battle had begun. Under the blood-red eye of the moon, the forces clashed. At its epicenter, two titans met. Kaelen shed his human form, becoming a massive, magnificent black wolf, his fur drinking the crimson light. Gorath shifted into a grizzled, monstrous beast of pure muscle and scarred hide. Their battle was an earthquake. They crashed together with the sound of collapsing cliffs. But Kaelen was different. He was not fighting with desperate rage, but with a calm, focused fury backed by a love that anchored him. He was faster, more fluid. I stood my ground, a calm center. With a gesture, I sent a sheet of black ice beneath the feet of Gorath's advancing reinforcements, sending them into a chaotic sprawl. With a focused thought, I flashed a burst of blinding silver light into the eyes of Gorath's archers. I was not fighting his battle. I was ensuring it was fair. Gorath, seeing his tactics fail, grew reckless. He feigned injury, luring Kaelen in. As the black wolf lunged, Gorath spun and slammed a massive paw into Kaelen's side, reopening the barely healed wound. Kaelen stumbled, a yelp of pain escaping him. Gorath pinned him, his jaws dripping, descending for the killing bite. Time stopped. I felt Kaelin's flare of pain through our bond. No, my command was silent. I thrust both hands forward. A lance of concentrated moonlight, a river of liquid starlight, and absolute zero shot from me. It struck Gorath in the shoulder as he lunged. He howled, a sound of unimaginable agony as the cold fire seared him, not burning but unmaking the flesh. He was thrown sideways, his shoulder smoking with silver mist. Kaelen scrambled up. We shared a glance and our souls aligned perfectly. I sent a pulse of disorienting light into Gorath's eyes. As he staggered, blinded, I froze the ground solid beneath his paws, trapping him. He was immobilized. Kaelen didn't hesitate. It was no longer a fight, it was justice. The black wolf's jaws closed on the rival Alpha's throat. There was a final, definitive wrench, and then silence. The silence on the field was broken only by the whimpers of Gorath's leaderless warriors. They threw down their weapons. It was over. Kaelen, back in human form, stood over his fallen rival. He was bloodied, but he stood tall, a king victorious. He then turned his gaze to the true traitor. Lord Cillian's men had already seized Thuron, dragging the stunned old wolf forward. "You betrayed your kingdom," Kaelin's voice was quiet, granite. "You betrayed your Alpha. You betrayed the memory of a hero and condemned an innocent to a life of shame. You orchestrated a war that cost pack lives." He looked to Cillian and gave a single nod. "The price for treason is blood." There was no trial. The evidence was witnessed by all. Justice was swift, absolute, and final. The corruption that had festered for a generation was cut out at the root. The other conspirators fell to their knees, bowing not just to the king's wrath, but to the silent, glowing queen at his side. The aftermath was for healing. I moved among the wounded of both sides, my Luminara light now a gentle, soothing balm. I was no longer a symbol of controversy, but of mercy and hope. As dawn finally broke, painting the sky in soft pastels, the exhaustion gave way to peace. The war was over, the lie was dead. Kaelen found me. He wrapped his arms around me and we stood there in the quiet aftermath, two survivors holding each other up, our foreheads touching. We had won. Weeks later, the great hall was filled once more, but with a new, hopeful energy. The kingdom was healing. Two thrones sat side by side on the dais. At the joint coronation, Kaelen was reaffirmed as Alpha King, his authority now rooted in truth and justice. Beside him I was crowned, not just as Luna, but as Queen Elara the Luminara. The cheer that rose was not just for a ruler, but for one of their own, risen from the shadows. When the cheers faded, I stepped forward. My voice, once a whisper, now carried to the farthest corner with calm authority. "I remember standing outside these very doors," I began, my gaze sweeping over nobles, warriors, and servants alike. "I remember the cold. I remember believing some were meant for warmth and others for the dark." I paused. That belief is a poison. It ends today. I drew myself up. As my first decree, the gates of this castle and the doors of this hall will never again be locked to those who seek shelter. Rank will not determine worth. Omega, Beta, Alpha, we are one pack. No one will be left in the cold, not ever again. The roar of approval shook the stone. It was a cheer for a new era. That night we stood on the balcony, looking over our peaceful, starlit kingdom. He took my hand. "My Luminara," he whispered. "My king," I replied, leaning into him. The question that had haunted me, "Am I worthy?" was answered. My worth was not given, it was inherent. I was no longer the forgotten Omega in the snow. I was the queen who had brought the dawn. Thank you so much for joining Elara and Kaelen on their journey from the frozen courtyard to the twin thrones. If their story of redemption, hidden power, and a love that changed a kingdom warmed your heart, please let us know. Smash that like button, subscribe for more epic, halal-friendly tales, and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. Tell us in the comments what you loved most. Should we explore more of the Luminara legends in a future story? If you'd like to give an extra boost of support to our creative team, you can also send a super thanks. It helps us continue bringing you stories like this. Until next time.